It's a common trap for many GMs, especially newer GMs, to treat information like a commodity in roleplay games. And because it gets treated like a commodity, GMs can start to think that it should be earned by the players rather than just given to them. What I want to do with this video is show how being more generous with information as a GM can improve a game, and also how freely giving information can be used to reward players and improve player immersion and investment into a game. As the GM, you are the window to the world. The majority of what your players experience and understand about the game and the world they are playing in will come from you. If they enter a room, the key details about the room generally come from the GM. How big is it? What's the lighting like? Is there anybody in the room? What are they doing? Is there anything in the room that instantly catches the character's attention? All of this stuff will most often come to the players from the GM, and then the players have to decide how to interact with this information. And while this is all fairly standard stuff, the issue comes when the GM decides there is something secret in the room. It could be a secret door, or some hidden loot, a hidden enemy, an NPC withholding information, or just some information which isn't readily available to them. But it's not uncommon that when a GM decides that there is something there that the characters need to find, they'll come up with some arbitrary hoops that the players have to jump through before the information gets handed over. Now, the major problem with this way of doing things is that while the GM is waiting patiently for the players to look for the information, the players have a decent chance of not even realizing that there is information being concealed. The GM is the window to the world after all. The players don't have a full range of senses and intuition to call on like in real life, so subtle cues that might normally prompt investigation aren't there. So if the GM fails to even hint that there may be more than meets the eye to the current situation, the players are likely to move on without digging any deeper. I mean, life is full of uninteresting rooms with nothing concealed in them. What's one more? And as players move on, secret unfound, as a GM we're often left feeling a little bit disappointed, as something that we worked on has been missed, and the players are none the wiser. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we can't have secrets as a GM, but if the players don't know that we have them, they're not really worth anything. We don't have to give the players everything for free, but always give them something. If the players enter a room with a secret door, we could say something like, "The way the air moves around the room seems strange to you. There's something here is not what it seems." If there's an enemy lurking in ambush, we could say something like, "The hairs on your neck prickle up as you get a sudden feeling you are in danger." These cues will let the players know that something is up. That doesn't mean that the players will have to find the secret door from here. Their search could end up falling flat, but it's much more interesting for them to leave the room frustrated that the room secret eluded them, rather than having passed through an uninteresting and forgettable room. And just because we gave them a warning of the coming danger doesn't mean they can't fail a roll and be caught flat-footed by the waiting enemy. The additional information will make the world feel more real and give the players more to interact with, because the alternatives are either the players develop a series of questions to pry the information out of us every time they enter a scene. I check for this, I check for that, I look for this, I look for that, and this kind of regimented room clearing style be time consuming and boring. Or the other alternative is that a lot of potentially interesting events get passed by. A common saying in role-playing is that the GM should be a fan of the characters, and giving them an inkling of concealed information like this is a good way of making them feel clever and capable. And that really brings me to my next point. Giving the information away more freely can also be a way to encourage and reward players, especially newer players. It can also be a good way to encourage different styles and get the players to try different things. Once we are committed to parting with all this additional information, how we deliver it to the players can be used to really strengthen the game. Instead of just announcing to the party that they get a sense of the impending danger, we can instead pick a player whose character is more perceptive and say, "Hey Lydia, for just a second your sharp ears pick up the sound of someone trying to breathe quietly in the room ahead." Doing it like this still conveys the same info as the previous example, but in addition to that, it also rewards the player. They will likely feel that their choices they have made while building their character were valid, and that they are being an asset to the group, even if it's only at a subconscious level. And with newer players, whether they're new to the RPGs in general or they're just new to the group, doing this can help with confidence building. It can be a very subtle way of making the players feel like they are fitting in, and what they are doing is good and right. This can be a very good tool for bringing players out of their shell. And continuing on with this idea, when we're describing an area the players are entering, how the area is described can prompt them to think about how they intend to interact with the area. For example, if they're told you approach a stone fortress, the walls are high and the portcullis is currently closed for the night, but 2 guards stand at the entry, This basic description doesn't tell them much and will likely put all the players' focus on the guards. But instead, if more is added to the description, like as you approach the stone fortress, the walls are high and the portcullis is currently closed for the night, but 2 guards stand at the entry. Tordek, your time in the army tells you that the lord of this place must not be a very military-minded person because the trees and undergrowth have been allowed to grow far too close to the walls for comfort. This extra line of description, it not only acts as a confidence boost for one of the players, but it also gives a bit of extra information on an NPC of importance. It offers potential alternative paths of entrance to the fort, and it expands on the general area of the world they have just entered. And if the players are normally straight to the point kind of people, marching directly at any issue and taking it on head first, maybe this other path hinted at in the description will make them consider alternatives. And rather than waiting to see if the players ask to see if there's any other way into the fort or start looking for information about the Lord, this freely given information is likely to prompt more questions and ideas from the players as they play with the puzzle pieces they have been given and decide how they wish to interact with them. And even if the players take one look at the fort and move on without doing anything, the world is now a bigger and richer place than it was prior. The party might come across a band of savage raiders later on and think, wow, we should probably warn that fort lord because they're really not ready for this raid. Or they might just think, wow, that fort is screwed, and later, when they pass back near the fort, sure enough, it's a smoking ruin, and they can think, yep, we were right. Because here's the thing, problem solving and interacting with the world in a roleplay game can be puzzling enough as it is. There are often a lot of factors for the players to consider, and while it may seem clear and simple as a GM, we have access to the entire picture. I mean, I previously referred to some information as a puzzle piece because if we consider the game as a jigsaw puzzle, it's the GM's job to create the majority of the pieces and the player's job to put them together. If everything works out, we should end up with an interesting picture that was enjoyable to create for everybody involved. If too much information is concealed or withheld by the GM, this isn't part of the player's assembly process. What is essentially being done is not only do the players have to put the puzzle together, they also have to find all the pieces in the first place. And if there is even the slightest chance that the players might miss or not jump through the right hoops to get all the information, it's basically guaranteed that a lot of the pieces will stay missing. I think the most common reason why a GM will withhold information is to challenge the players, which at a base level isn't a bad reason to do it. We want to challenge the players. Roleplay is largely about challenge. My theory though is rather than making the gathering of information the challenge, where once it's all available it makes perfect sense and seems straightforward, instead give them the information and make the challenge come from how they interpret and react to the information. Experience has shown me that players that know they are missing something key to the story but are unaware of how to go about getting it are likely to be frustrated in a way that is detrimental to their enjoyment of the game. However, players that feel that they have a good understanding of what's going on but are just unsure how to deal with it, while they are still challenged, it's a challenge they are much more free in how they deal with it and it's far more enjoyable experience. But in saying that, if the pitfall of less information is the potential for player frustration, then there's got to be something. There's got to be a potential problem with too much information, right? Well, there is. And the most common issue is that the players will misinterpret some of the information given. But that's something that can be much more productive and enhancing to a game when used right. I mean, when we role play, we're creating a fictional narrative, right? It's just as a group. When players misinterpret things, that is just them feeding new and different ideas back to the GM. Basically a new perspective on an idea the GM is already seeding into the game. And chances are, the new idea might build on or be better than the current idea as it stands. This can be a really useful tool to the GM when used right. So useful in fact it probably warrants a separate video of its own. So in conclusion, being freer with our information as a GM is a good way to make sessions more interesting, make the players feel more confident about making choices, it can strengthen immersion and investment in the players, it can encourage different styles of gameplay and experimentation, and it can really help with making the world you're creating feel more real and more vibrant. If you're a GM and you've stuck with the video this long, I highly encourage you to give it a go. I mean, what's the worst that can happen?